BBC Radio Devon, Edwyn Collins, and A Girl Like You. So you think of that as being quite a new song. It's not. It's about 25 years old or something ridiculous like that, which is just... time isn't allowed to pass like that. It gets very upsetting. In the studio with me tonight, as you can hear already, are Circle of Spears, Sam Burns, Mark Norman and Tracy Norman. And, well, I won't tell you what they do. They can tell you what they do. Who's gonna tell me about Circle of Spears? Mark, you're... poised to speak, aren't you?
I will indeed, if you like. Yeah. So we are a production company who work both in live entertainment and in audio. We formed about 3 years ago. Our original premise really was to work with independent authors, independent publishers, small publishers, to produce audiobooks. So what we wanted to do was to give people who didn't have the opportunity to take their work to audio because it was too cost prohibitive, the chance to be able to do so. So we started
If you're J.K. Rowling, then it's not a problem. But
absolutely.
When you're starting off, then Stephen Fry isn't knocking on the door at this point.
No, sadly not. But the door is always open to Mr. Fry should he wish to do so.
If only he'd return our calls.
But we wanted to give people who are in a similar position to us, people who are starting out or smaller businesses, smaller authors, the opportunity to be able to work in a professional way. We're all either professional actors or ex-media industry professionals. So we're looking to produce a product that is on a par with those of the bigger studios, but to people who couldn't normally afford it. So we developed a unique point to be able to work with our authors where they could do that.
And what about yourself, Sam? Tell me a bit about you.
Well, like the others here, I came to this from an acting background, and I found that, one of the things that we all had in common was that we all did audio work individually beforehand, and we worked for a number of different people, and a lot of the time we ended up going, well, you know what, we could probably do this ourselves. We all have a home setup. Hang on. And the rest is history. But, I joined the company shortly after graduating from drama school, and it's been a fairly steady stream of work ever since.
Yeah, it's quite a specialist area, I guess, doing something. Well, actually, I mean, it's making radio drama, but it's in a slightly different way, isn't it, when it comes to being an audiobook?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what the client wants. A lot of our stuff is a single voice read. Yeah, but we've got 2 or 3 on the books where we have all worked together collaboratively, which is great, because working in isolation can get a little bit isolating. And so it's really nice we can all come together, work on one project together. For example, Tales of the Lantern, which we did, which was our Halloween release this year. That was something we hadn't actually done before, with sort of a full cast audio with sound, full soundscape as well, which was really nice. So
some of which was recorded sound effects that we sourced from various places, others of which we creatively developed ourselves in proper kind of Foley style, using products and things around.
Well, all manner of things. I mean, I talked about this a little while ago when we made our most recent programme that we did with John Nettles on Sir Walter Raleigh. Raleigh. That was a whole programme of debate about that. But the fun we had coming up with sound effects was brilliant, because you can buy sound effects, but they're actually really expensive.
Yes.
They are.
But so it's far more fun and indeed cost sensible to make your own, and the enjoyment you can have trying to come up with stabbings and all manner of other great wonderful
how
things.
We do Running on Sand?
Right. Well, Running on Sand, which is featured in a number of the different stories that's on Tales of the Lantern, we actually ended up first of all, we tried to record outside, running across gravel and other things like that, but it didn't quite work. And then we realised
doing the thing that you want to make the noise of doesn't make the noise.
Exactly.
It really doesn't, does it?
But we came up with a solution. Coming back inside, I sat down on a beanbag chair and realised, oh, hang on, that's sort of making an interesting... And it led to a hilarious moment where I was having to just sort of pad this beanbag chair in a rhythmic fashion and then collapse on it, because that was part of the sound effect as well.
We filmed it and put it on our Instagram because we felt that it needed to be
hilarious.
seen by other people.
It's the sort of thing that, not very many people can say they do at their day at the office.
Yeah. Well, I remember once recording I was doing several takes to get it right. Recording myself sitting down. We needed. If you could picture the sound. This wasn't in the Water Rolly program. This isn't something else that we did. But if you can picture the sound it would make, or the sound you perceive it should make, if you sit down in a rather nicely upholstered, battered leather chair, needed that sort of creaky noise, and it almost, as you get a bit older, you make a bit of a noise yourself, don't you? You just sit down. It's like, and leaning back, and we had several takes of this, and then much fun was had at my expense afterwards. That what I'd actually done was sit down several times. Have that recorded. Anyway, there we are. Enough about me. So, what's your background, Tracy?
I also have a stage background, and like Sam was saying, we all worked freelance on audio, recording for Audible, and then we all met together during a production.
As so often is the way.
As is the way. And and then we all decided, we could do this. Why don't we?
Yeah.
So we did.
Yeah, and here you are. You've done all sorts of stage shows, haven't you? I'm looking at your
yeah.
resume here.
Yes.
Including playing Nursey in Blackadder on stage.
God,
that
was
must have been
so much fun.
I was going to say that must have been brilliant.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Where was that?
Well, that was actually where we used to live in North Taunton. That was the local group there, and they got permission to do some Blackadder 2. And
speaking of
was...
Water Rolly, yes,
Yeah.
We didn't do that one.
That was a lot of fun.
It was
especially because I played Blackadder, which was immensely enjoyable, and it was nice to do something that was like working with the local community drama group rather than working at a more professional level. It was brilliant to be able to do something that ultimately was raising money as well, because bless the BBC and the rights holders, it was a case of you donate to Comic Relief rather than have royalties for putting it on, and there is no official script, you get to put on the ones that you want to do, so that's what we did, and it was
must be quite fun doing something like that when you're playing Blackadder, because do you play the role of Blackadder or do you play Rowan Atkinson?
Well,
do you know what I mean? Where you kind of
that was a really interesting discussion that was had, actually, and we tried to be as faithful as we could, because we had historical reenactors who'd made the costumes for it, so they were pretty screen accurate, but at the same time we would never try and be those other people, but we would try and put their talent across in the way that we did it, and ultimately everybody had a good time, so I think it went all right.
A good start, isn't it? Exactly. With loads and loads and loads we can talk about. I want to talk about the live stuff that you do as well. We'll hear some clips of some of the productions you've made as well, which would be good fun. Plenty to do before that, though. More conversation with our Circle of Spears guest tonight. Also opening another door in the Radio Devon Advent calendar, and meeting another of our unsung heroes between now and 10 o'clock tonight as well. Right now, though, my guests between now and 9, Sam Burns, Mark Norman and Tracy Norman. I presume that's not a coincidence, the surname, by the way.
No.
No, it's the funniest thing. You just randomly met one day.
We accidentally got married and then ended up with the same surname.
Still don't know how that
Strange and mysterious things. I should point out, by the way, if you're on Twitter, then follow the @BBC Devon Twitter account, or indeed the Circle of Spears Twitter account at the moment. It's very active, because these three, well, to be fair, Sam, you haven't tweeted anything, but these two are just, it's machines.
Yeah.
There's always one slacker in every group.
It's almost it's almost like a video. It's like if you flick through the pictures quickly enough, it will look like a video.
Yeah, you got to get it up to like 24 frames, right?
Yeah. Working on it.
We've got we'll just kind of allude to it now. We've got a really exciting announcement to come between now and 9 o'clock, haven't we? Because we've had some good news today, which we will share. But let's go back to the beginning. How does it work then? When you first get in contact with an author, or the author contacts you, maybe?
Mostly these days the author contacts us, which is really nice. Yeah, it's a lovely position to be in. Yeah, so basically they will submit their book, and if we decide to go ahead with it, essentially they then decide which of us they would like to read it. Sometimes we advise. Sometimes people have a very definite idea about who should read what.
Is there an element of competitiveness about this?
No, not at all, because we're all very different, aren't we?
Yes. I mean, the beauty of it is that... like, I, for example, would probably never be up to read a book that Tracy would be, or that Mark necessarily would be, because we have three, hopefully, quite distinct vocal styles, and so we tend to invite the authors to listen to our audio samples and decide which they feel would be best suited to their piece.
Yeah, and then that person sort of takes over their managing their project, if you like. They become their project manager. And so in discussion with the author, we then send the chapters for approval once they are recorded and edited and treated and everything. And then at the end of it, hopefully everybody has a product that they are happy with. And the fact that we do get a lot of people coming to us on personal recommendations these days is really nice, and hopefully is a testament to what we're doing, showing us that we're doing it right.
I think
There's always room for improvement, but we're on the right track.
I think one of the reasons that people do that as well is because very early on we said that we were annoyed by listening to other people's products or reading books where the proofreading or the checking is not up to standard. And we, two of the three of us are authors as well. So we're very much minded that authors spend a long time writing these words, so if we're not speaking the words that are on the page, we're doing them a disservice. So we have quite an involved kind of quality control process where we all listen to each other's recordings against the script before they even go to the author for checking. So we hope, you miss things, but we hope that what's on the page is always what comes out in our audio.
And will you do that, though? Because written English and spoken English are very different things. I know, if we are writing for radio, we will write in a way that if you submitted it as your English GCSE, they will say, well, that's not how you write, because it's different, isn't it?
Yeah, that's very true. And we do have authors come back. We will always speak what they have written, but they will sometimes come back and go, do you know what, I want to change that. And then they'll change it.
Not because what they've written as a book was wrong, but because it's different.
It doesn't always translate.
And typos happen.
Yeah. And it's their prerogative to make the change that they want.
If anything like that does pop up while we're recording, we just flag it up to the author. They tell us what they want us to do. We do it, and then we progress.
How long does it take to record a book?
Because really depends on the length of the book.
Well, that's fair. That's a reasonable response to a stupid question.
No, it's not a stupid question at all, because there are some books that will present specific technical challenges. Like we did a book a little while ago which was just two voices, but it was a compilation of short stories. So we had the ability to do that in isolation, but then we had to, when we put it all together, make sure it seemed all like a consistent product. And that was a little bit more involved than, say, one of our other books, which would be just one single voice and no sound effects.
Oh, I think just the process of recording the voice track takes a long time. I mean, I know, reading my children's stories at bedtime, you read for 10 minutes, whatever, you might have got through 6 pages or something. So actually it takes a long time to read aloud.
I'm not sure if there's an official write-up on this, but I think it's supposedly that if you have an A4 page of text, which is regularly standard, it's usually about a minute and a half.
Something like that.
They say around 9,000 words an hour.
Yeah.
So your average novel is 80,000 words. So you're looking at 9 or 10 hours of
finished product.
But many more hours of retaking and editing and
wondering why you're wearing somebody else's teeth, swearing at the microphone. That sort of
There's often a lot of swearing.
I would be willing to bet that for every minute or for every hour that we produce as a final product, there is at least 2 or 3 more that would be taken up by either editing or checking or that sort of thing, or just liaising with the author.
If you've got questions, by the way, for my guest tonight, then do feel free to text 81333, starting your text with the word Devon, or you can just join the cascade of tweets.
In fact, I did tweet earlier. I tweeted, BBC Wi-Fi.
That's true. Yes, and I
Mark's tweeted about the coffee.
I did mention BBC Coffee at one point. That's true.
Does it live up to reputation?
It's as good as I remember it from the last time I was here.
Oh, good. Damn with faint praise. Don't like coffee. Work of the devil. Can't get involved with that. I'll stick to the tea. Thank you very much. So tell me, we've got a clip here from one of the books you've been working on recently called Tales of the Lantern. Tell me a little bit about this one and what we're going to hear.
Tales of the Lantern is a collection of 5 short stories featuring the folklore and urban legends of the UAE, which was written by the lovely Deidre Stevenson. And because the stories are quite short, but really, really good as a Halloween kind of short story collection or a Christmas Eve collection, I suggested to her that we didn't just do them as straight reads, we turned them into mini radio plays, if you like. So these are the ones that have all the soundscape, multi-voice productions, and I think they came out okay, didn't they?
They were a lot
I
of
really,
fun.
I really enjoyed working on those because it was one of these projects. We all got together, we all recorded in the one place. We did the sound effects together. Then I dropped all the sound effects in, sent them out to the guys, said, right, listen to this, see what you think. They fed back to me things they liked, things they didn't. We tweaked it. We all sent it off to Deidre. She loved it.
Yeah, and of
the rest
course
is
our author's
history.
in the United Arab Emirates, so we're using Skype to talk to her. It's a multicultural experience.
And it's really nice to do something featuring the folklore of a different country because I hadn't heard of any of those stories. It's very specific to the area that she lives in, and it was really fascinating. So I learned quite a lot from doing that, not least a Persian, the tune of a Persian lullaby, which had to feature.
Which
in
you'd
one
like
of
to
the
sing for
stories.
us now?
No, I wouldn't.
That product is very good.
Let's have a listen then. This is from Tales of the Lantern.
That evening, as she was departing, Carol noticed that the moon was full, and it glowed from the red clouds that engulfed it. She was still near Burgundy's home, and there was a chill in the air, even though it was the dead heat of summer.
How odd.
She thought, but shrugged off the prickly feeling that something was amiss. Unfortunately, on this particular evening, Carol was right to feel that all was not well. On this strangely cloudy night, when the full moon could barely be seen through the red clouds, an enraged energy found its way into the living world. As the human world slept, the entity swept through the air, seeking the bloodline that had cost him everything in life.
Ooh, it is quite spooky, isn't it?
Yes. Well, there was a reason why we put it out for Halloween.
Yeah. And that's obviously one of yours. Well, actually, it's a short bit of you as well, Tracy, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was the narrator for that one.
Yeah,
but one of the nice things about that product was that we all got to take a turn at narrating and voicing the characters. Generally, it's usually one person doing the narration and everything else. Although occasionally we have done audiobooks where we have different people doing the character dialogue than we have doing the narration, which adds a new element to it sometimes.
Yeah. Really, I do get the impression you have a lot of fun doing it.
Oh, yeah.
It's brilliant. We get paid to read stories for a living. What's not to like? It's the best job ever.
And to read to other people in different ways as well. I mean, one of the things that kind of span off from this, excuse me, one of the things that span off from this really was that we started to do live versions of some of these sorts of readings. So we just... Was it last week? My brain has stopped working.
Yeah,
last week we did a fundraising evening for Oakhampton Library, for the Friends of Oakhampton Library, with a show that we perform down in Cornwall at the Witchcraft Museum quite often over the summer, which is live ghost story readings, which are set to a bit of music, and we do them in character as deceased Victorian librarians. So this show is often set in libraries, and we read short stories, but either well-known sort of M.R. James style short stories, or ones that have been written occasionally by some of the authors on our books, or traditional stories from the area in which we're performing. So for Oakhampton we did a couple of local ghost legends, and we stand and we tell stories to people, and storytelling is as old as the hills as a form of entertainment, and it translates really well to the stage too.
Yeah. Was it the hairy hands?
We didn't do the hairy hands for that one. No,
everyone loves the hairy hands.
we did Lady Howard.
Lady Howard, which is one of my favourites.
Oh, tell me about Lady Howard.
Lady Howard was a 4 times married woman who was orphaned at the age of 9 when her father committed suicide. He'd lost the family fortune, and he ended up murdering his best friend and another man at the gates of Fitsford House in Tavistock, which is where their family seat was. Mary was made a ward of the court, and her wardship was sold to Sir Alan Percy, who made her marry his brother,
the Earl of Northumberland.
The Earl of Northumberland, when she was 12, and then after that, she ended up marrying another 3 times, and each time she was a bit like Bess of Hardwick. She became very savvy and secured her fortune so that her husbands couldn't touch it, which led to a lot of animosity, I believe. And eventually, her story and that of her father, she was much maligned during her life, I believe, and the story of her 4 marriages and her father, they all became kind of intermingled so you couldn't really distinguish one from the other. And the legend goes that she emerges from the gates of Fitsford House in a black carriage with the skulls of her 4 husbands, who she is alleged to have murdered, on each of the corners of the carriage, and a black greyhound with a single eye in the middle of its forehead running before her. And she has to drive to Oakhampton Castle, pluck a single blade of grass from the mound and return. And she has to keep doing this every night until the mound is cleared of grass, which is obviously one of those tasks which will take until doomsday. There are a lot of sightings of her around Bridestow, Lidford, Oakhampton. Sometimes the carriage is said to stop and offer a lift, and it's advised to refuse.
There's almost a touch of the Conan Doyle about it, isn't there? It's very nice. I like that.
Yeah. It is one of those local stories which inspired Conan Doyle when he wrote The Hound of the Baskervilles. He spent a lot of time down in the area with Bertram Fletcher Robinson, who is a good friend of his. The Fletcher Robinsons lived in Ipple Pen, and part of the inspiration for the story of the Hound and the Hound of the Baskervilles came from Fletcher Robinson and his family taking Conan Doyle around and telling them some of the stories of Dartmoor and the local area.
As you say, you've got to have a passion for stories to do the
Absolutely.
job you do, haven't
Yeah.
you?
One of the nice things actually about that show is it's almost infinitely reusable, in that you can take it to wherever you want to go with it, and usually find a local story that fits within the structure of the show to give it that unique edge.
We have, as I say, got some exciting news in a moment. Should we do that in after another song? Should we?
Yeah, go on.
We could do that, couldn't we? That'd be very nice. All right then. It is 8:34. So we've been talking about how it starts when you're creating an audiobook, and we talked about making the sound effects and getting the authors and so on. So let's drag this out a little bit longer. Basically, we've got exciting news of a new author, haven't we? This is what it boils down to.
We have.
But tell us about the people you're working with at the moment, the sort of authors you've got. Well, where did it start?
Yeah.
Where did it start? It started with Troy Books in Cornwall, didn't it?
did, yeah.
That was our first release.
Yeah, our first release came from a Cornish publisher called Troy Books, and the whole reason for getting that set up is that Troy Books are my book publisher for my writing. So there was an in there to be able to start translating work into audio. So we came to an arrangement with Troy to produce a couple of their books. They're an esoteric book publisher, so they publish titles on witchcraft, fits in with your piece earlier on, and folklore and those sorts of subjects. Gemma Gary, who is a very, very well-known witchcraft author and practitioner in Cornwall, has got 2 or 3 books published with Troy. She's part of the company. And our very first title was Traditional Witchcraft, which was Gemma's first book that she wrote.
And obviously you went to them and said, well, you know me as an author. By the way, I've got this idea. We can do this as well. What did you say? Look, give us a go, and I'll prove you it can be good, and I'll come back to you with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were very amenable to that, and said, yeah, okay, do it. send it to us. We'll have a listen, see what we think, and the rest is history, really, from that.
Yeah, I mean, by contrast, one of the titles that shortly followed that was a fiction, which was The Vampire's Tomb Mystery, which is a really nice sort of 1950s detective romp through Hollywood, where you feature a number of well-known faces from the time, and that was from an American author who had been... Well, they'd been put in touch with us through their then publisher, and that was one where we ended up doing a narrator and a different person for the character voices. And yeah, I think I'm right in saying that was the first fiction
yes, it was.
title we did.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
And again, that was actually, in a lot of ways, it was a title that set the trend for how we dealt with authors going forward from there, in that they were involved quite extensively in every aspect of the sort of the directorial side of producing it. Like we would, because again, in that particular title, we were dealing with like real people who you could go and look at reference clips of and things. You had to go and do your research and find out that sort of stuff, and the author was very knowledgeable about that particular period of history. So we brought them on board and said, okay, is this right? You know, what is the context of this character that you've included here?
And I was thinking, at a time when, you know, media, both print and broadcast and everything is changing more rapidly than it probably has at any point in any of our lifetimes. Is the spoken word book or the audio dramatization, is that still a growing market?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it is.
It's a lot of the time one of the chief ways that people consume that sort of media these days.
Yeah, I mean, it serves various positive purposes. You know, for people who can't read print books for whatever reason, if they have failing eyesight, a lot of elderly readers get their work through audio rather than that. For people who spend a lot of time on the road, they do their reading using audio whilst they're driving. So, yes, it's still popular, but what's changed is the method of delivery.
How it's consumed, yeah.
So, whereas traditionally it was cassettes and then CDs, that's still an element of what we do. We put all of our titles out on multi-CD recordings for people who like it in that way. But by far and large, the majority of the market now is delivered via download or streaming services. Because
actually you're probably listening to it on a phone or something, some headphones plugged in, then you may as well have it that way in the first place, mightn't you?
Yeah.
Okay, so, exciting news today. What's happening?
So today we got the contracts signed for our latest author. Why this is really pleasing is because this is probably the biggest name author I think that we've brought on board so far. The titles that Sam and I were talking about earlier on when we first started the company were titles that we were approaching people with our ideas for. Yeah. So we were saying, you know, we think this would make a good audio. This is a company that we're trying to establish. Now, as we were saying, fortunately, we're in the position where people come to us and say, can you do this?
Yeah.
And we don't actively seek out authors so much now. They kind of seek us out, and that's what happened in this case. So our new author came via one of our previous authors who'd worked with them in a writing group and said, I've just had my work done by these guys, you really ought to consider it. So we just got a random message out of the blue and they said, do you want to do one of my books? We'd really like to try it. And we said, yeah, all right then. We'll think about that for like half a second. So yes, if you're a fan of science fiction or fantasy as a genre, that's what's going to be coming up first in the new year. So our new author is Adrian Tchaikovsky, who is a very, very well-known science fiction and fantasy author. He's got about 20 novels under his belt, so he's been writing for a little while. He's a British Fantasy Award winner for a book called The Tiger and the Wolf. He is award-winning from the Arthur C. Clarke Science Fiction Awards with another book, Children of Time, and is probably best known for a massive series of books called Shadows of the Apt. So we are going to be producing one of the Apt series of books, actually from Tales of the Apt, the second volume, and we're going to be producing it as a multi-voice read. It's a collection, a large collection of shorter stories, which we're going to produce, and Adrian has chosen who's going to read each one himself. So we'll go into studio in January and start to produce that one.
And presumably, from your perspective, this is great news because this is someone who's written 20 books.
Oh, tremendous. Yes. Yeah.
Yes, well, we're not going to be presumptuous enough to suggest that we'll take the whole catalogue on board, but certainly,
if he'd like to,
certainly we'll not turn that offer down if it's made to us. But yes, this is kind of a test bed book for him and for us to see how it comes out, and then we'll see how our relationship develops in the future. But it's exciting for us, and we're really looking forward to doing it.
Congratulations!
It's a great book.
Yeah,
thank you.
Which is great. It's good to see a Devon business making inroads and growing, which is what you are.
Indeed,
yeah,
yes.
absolutely. And I think the only business in Devon, I'm willing to be proven wrong, but I think we're the only business in Devon that are producing audiobooks as a kind of
certainly
bigger
that
concern.
we know of.
Yeah. If we're not, then great. We'd love to hear from other people that are doing the same. So
we
But
can
if there
chat
is
about
anybody else
it.
that keeping very quiet about
Yes.
it.
Yes.
And we were chatting just while listening to the music about some of the challenges you face making these. And of course, I suppose the thing is, Sam, because it's a small company and there's the three of you doing most of the voices, you have to be pretty flexible and adaptable in terms of the voices you can do.
Yeah, and I think pretty much every single new release we've done has given us a new accent or mode of speaking to explore and to study. And some are more challenging than others, but
what makes your heart sink when you think, oh no, I've got to do what?
actually the thing that is most difficult is if you have a lot of dialogue and it's different accents that you're switching between.
Yeah.
Although, having said that, the accent that most people I think find the most difficult is the Newcastle accent or the Geordie accent.
Yeah.
Because
it's really, really strong and distinctive, but not necessarily eased to do. Yeah.
Yes, and we've got a bit of that in another one of our upcoming releases, which is called The Corsio Contract, which is a crime thriller set in the 1980s, and the main character in that has a Newcastle accent, and there's a bunch of other different accents as well. But I remember thinking there's one bit in it that's, without giving too much away, it takes place in Spain, and I had to be speaking Spanish in a Newcastle accent, which is one of the most difficult things I have done professionally.
I was really glad that was a male narrator.
Yeah. That's really another thing actually we should mention, is that not all of the time, but a lot of the time, whether or not it's a male or a female narrator will be determined, well, ultimately by the author, but often by whether or not the main character or voice in the story is male or female.
Yeah.
Like, you would probably only ever have, for example, a woman reading Pride and Prejudice, whereas you would probably almost only ever have a man reading Dickens.
Yeah.
Just as an example.
It just kind of sounds right for that reason.
Yeah, a lot of the time it is largely determined by the either the main character or the main sort of voice that you would have.
What have you found most challenging, Tracy?
I'm doing a freelance project at the moment which involves about 7 different accents: Irish, Scottish, Polish, Russian, Liverpudlian, Sheffield, and I think there's another one.
What's your favourite one to do?
My favourite one to do is probably... out of that project or just generally?
Just generally, I suppose, yeah.
I quite like doing American, actually.
Yeah.
But where? It's a long way from Tennessee to New York, and
well,
that's
true.
That's very true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was thinking when you were saying then about Russian and Polish. Now, probably to most Brits, that's going to sound kind of generic Eastern European. But of course, if you are Russian or Polish, I'm sure there is a huge difference between the two.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's why it's quite useful to look on YouTube and actually be able to listen to native speakers if you can find something.
Yeah.
Just to get the vowel sounds, and are there any sort of consonants that they pronounce differently? I had to do a audition once with an Egyptian accent, and they don't pronounce P's, they pronounce them as B's. Is that the right way around?
I believe so.
Yeah.
And,
I'm not going to argue.
little tips like that sort of add to the convincing, just trying to make it a little bit more convincing than just like a sort of straightforward vowel sound change.
Yeah, often it's the idiosyncrasies of an accent that will sell it.
Yeah.
And it will take it between being an impression of an accent to sounding genuine.
To the kosher
like
thing.
Yeah.
Lisa, it's been absolutely fascinating having you in. Thank you so much for coming down.
Very well.
Thank
we
you.
have much
It's been lovely
appreciated
being
it. And a great privilege to hear news of the new author as well. So let us know how
Yes.
that goes, won't you?
We'll do.
We will do, yeah.
Which would be very, very exciting. Well, have a good trip back
Thank you
to
very much.
Mid Devon. Thank you for coming in. We shall speak again, I'm sure.